If there's one thing that men universally find attractive, it's going really, really fast. Today, we are going to talk horsepower and holiness with Toby Rozell of Eurocompulsion. Stay tuned.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Catholic Gentleman. We are your host, Sam Guzman, founder and editor of The Catholic Gentleman, and myself, John Heinen, the director of Catholic Gentleman. We are blessed for you to join us, and we're thankful for you being here. If this is your first time, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe to whatever podcast player. If you're on Spotify or Stitcher or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, whichever one, iHeartRadio, that you're listening to, please click that subscribe button so that you can get all of our podcasts as they come out. Also encourage you to check out thecatholicgentleman.com for all the extra things that we have. And moving right into this exciting episode here, I too am really excited to be joined by Toby Rozell. I had my own little youth of loving cars and my little Honda Civic that I purposely chose to be a stick shift so that I could do a second gear scratch and, you know, anything else that that my immature mind was desiring to fulfill. And so we've got Toby here, though, who is a bit more than that. Not only is he a Catholic gentleman, but he was a Protestant and converted to the faith. He has 4 kids and he's been married for 12 years. And he is the founder and owner of Eurocompulsion, which is a manufacturing company of advanced auto performance parts. And so within that realm of these auto performance parts, it's things like the Alfa Romeo, cars, Fiat. He's expanded and to Jeep and to Dodge and Abarth, and he's just got a lot of experience, and we just are really looking forward to jumping in and hearing from him how he has grown in his faith, but also hearing about the cool things that he gets to put his talent towards. So, Toby, welcome.
How you guys doing? I'm very happy to be here. I'm actually a big fan of Sam before I even actually knew Sam. And I do want to point out that, Sam, I do have your autograph. So I will plan on trying to use that for monetary gain. I'm not going to lie. So
yeah, I hear they're going for a lot on eBay. See what you can get for it, man.
That's right. And keep me informed too, because that'll be a new item on the store. So
I'm very humble
Toby,
to be here.
Great. I want to hear how you got started in cars. Like I just want to dive right in and why cars, why the Alfa Romeo? Was it the Snake? Was it Milan? What was it that really just you found a niche? And not only did you find a niche, but a niche that just blew up and has been really successful. And so, from the beginning, I know our listeners, we all just want to hear.
Yeah, I think it's kind of odd. I was into cars growing up, but I had various cars, German, domestic, never really dabbled specifically, I think, in Italian cars. And when I first met my wife, my now father-in-law, he and his dad had a business where they had been working on older Fiats and older Alfa Romeos. And so kind of diving into that, I sort of became obsessed with Italian cars, I think. New cars are great. They're really fast. They're a little bit more exciting sometimes than older cars, but there's just a level of appreciation and attention to detail, I think, with especially older Italian vehicles that you just don't see anymore. Sometimes they want to make you pull your hair out. In that way, but there's just, you get behind the wheel of one and it's a totally different experience. So working on those older Italian vehicles was a definite joy. And then as things kind of progressed, I actually did not plan on making a career out of working on cars in any way, shape, or form. But it just kind of happened that way. And so Alfa Romeo left, both Fiat and Alfa Romeo left the United States, I think, in the early 90s was about the time that they ceased making cars or selling cars here. And when they announced they were going to be coming back, that was just something that we definitely had to jump on. And so we kind of transitioned from working on older cars, and which definitely changed the way that we do things in regards to how we make stuff and the kind of things we want to make, technology and everything like that. And it just somehow progressed into newer cars, and then Fiat came back, and then Alfa's like, okay, we're coming back now. So that, it's just sort of worked its way in to what we do. And we just kind of had to adapt and learn new things and teach ourselves things. I have no actual, academic schooling in regards to engineering and electronics and stuff like that. Most of what we do, we just did completely out of enthusiasm for cars. So it's kind of crazy. It's been crazy, but it's been awesome.
That's exciting. So, was there a father figure that was with you while you were working on these early Alphas? Was that, or just something?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, my parents, when I was very young, divorced, and my dad was really never in the picture. My grandfather was very active in my life. And I think part of where my enthusiasm for cars actually came from him, because he wasn't necessarily a tinkerer in the sense that he was really getting his hands dirty all the time and really messing with things in the engine bay. But he did have a huge passion for just owning and driving cars and making changes to them.
Yeah.
And so I think that spawned from there. But as I got older, I didn't really have someone to facilitate that. So my father-in-law and my grandfather-in-law, who's actually my godfather, when I was baptized and brought into the church, their enthusiasm for everything, we kind of connected on that. It sort of rekindled something that was from my childhood, I guess you would say. They're both really great. In fact, Bob, who is my grandfather-in-law, he's the one who initially schooled me in catechism. Whenever I was converting and coming into the church. And that's why I think I mentioned to you via email that my conversion wasn't really just out of necessity, marrying my wife, but there was actually a longing that he kind of fostered there. And so a lot of that time spent together talking about faith and religion and everything like that, a lot of times was done just literally over the engine bay of a car. We'd be, out here in this shop, like just talking and, having a beer and talking about cars. And then somehow that transitioned to faith. And so all that kind of spawned into this. It's crazy how it's all kind of glued together in some way, but those little conversations, they may seem insignificant at the time, but they really do lead to bigger things, both career-wise and in the faith. So they both of them kind of served as a purpose for facilitating not only religious aspect of life, but also automotive, which eventually would become my job, basically. So
I love it.
Yeah. So just kind of following up on you mentioned the older Alfa Romeos, like just, and then they came back to the United States and they're a lot more modern, I guess the word might be. But can you just walk us through the differences between like a car from, let's say, like 70s or 80s, maybe a little bit simpler, more mechanical, and then like a newer car where there's like computers galore and everything's electronically controlled and all that. So can you just kind of talk us through the main differences between a car of a previous generation and one of our modern cars like the one behind you?
Yeah.
And just how do you go about tinkering with those and improving the performance?
Well, older cars, coming from, so some of the older Alphas would have actual mechanical fuel injection systems. That's kind of where the advent of, I think, automotive electronics massively changed, especially in the 80s, was when they decided to electronically actuate the fuel delivery, which, is fuel and air, and spark, that's what makes a car go. That's right. And so they basically figured out how to electronically control all of that. But even back when, a lot of the cars that I became familiar with, actually getting my hands on experience, still had electronic fuel injection, which was the early 80s. They are so much more simple than like this car back here, because everything was, you can kind of think about it as in an analog way where each individual thing is being controlled by some sort of programming, or you're telling it what to do. So it's only monitoring exactly what you're telling it to look at. And you could adjust so many different things. The Spark Advance was completely open. You could tell it to change at any time. And the corrections were very simple. Fuel delivery, as far as forced induction cars like turbochargers and superchargers, you could just say, I want you to go to 15 PSI of boost, and I want you to stay there, and I want you to run it all the way to red line, and that was going to be it. So tuning cars was a lot simpler, and you had more freedom. Nowadays, every single thing on the car is regulated and monitored in some way. And there are corrections galore for just one type of scenario, or altitude, temperature, density, anything that the car can see. It's monitoring constantly. It monitors your wheel speed. It monitors the differences in wheel speed between all four wheels in some ways. It in an effort, I think, to make cars more intelligent per se, in order that you have different safety features and things on the car. As a result, it's made it more difficult to tell the car to do what you want it to do, because there are two modes of engine tuning. Older cars, you consider something called open loop. So it gets to a stage in open loop. Whatever you've told it to do, that's exactly what it's going to do. When it's in open loop mode, it doesn't matter the conditions. It doesn't matter if it's cold outside or it's hot outside. Yeah. It's going to do exactly what you tell it to do, and it's not going to do anything different. Newer cars are not like that. They're in closed loop constantly. So they have a set sort of standard or target. They know how to read a margin above that. They know how to read a margin below that. And so they're just constantly trying to correct to that target. And there's literally a target for everything, even things you would think are completely irrelevant to performance on a car. It's very controlled. There are lots of what I call nannies on the car. So they're always saying, no, you can't do that. No, you tried to do that, but I'm not going to let you. This car behind me is, when you're track driving, a popular thing to do is to left foot brake, because this is a common thing with Formula One drivers and every type of race car driver. It's a lot, especially with an automatic transmission or sequential. You're a lot quicker around a racetrack, and you can brake with your left foot and keep your right foot on the gas pedal. Well, in this car, when you're on the track and you try to left foot brake, it shuts you down. It says, nope, you can't do that. An older car would never do that. So there have definitely been some trade-offs with comforts of newer cars versus the more freedom to do things with older cars. The beauty is still there, but in different ways, I guess. So,
do you, of all the different car manufacturers that you guys are working on, do you find a propensity or a desire or a joy in Alphas over some of the other ones? Do you have a favorite? What's your thoughts on that?
That's actually a really good question, because there are some times when, we started working on Alphas and Fiats because that's just sort of what our niche was.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, some of the engine architecture and the way that they do things is very reminiscent of the way they have done older things. It's just more updated. So, that kind of fits into what we know. But sometimes they do stuff and I find myself frustrated, because I can't really defend why they would want to do this way. And I definitely really enjoy working with Alphas simply because, and this is you watch Top Gear, so
Yeah.
if you watch any episode where they ever review an Italian car of any kind, there's I think there's an episode where James May has a box on the dash of his Alpha that he's driving, and it's you put a quid in every time you say an Italian swear word, which actually isn't an Italian swear word. It's whenever you're trying to describe the car and you use words like emotive and passion and and those, it seems kind of cliche, but there is something very different about, when I get behind the wheel of a Mercedes and drive it, there's nothing wrong with it at all. But when you get behind the wheel of like this car, there's just something different about it. There's a different feel to how the Italians are very good at trying to design cars that speak to you, like actually touch the driver feedback versus just sort of surrounding you in really nice things in a comfortable ride.
Yeah.
They have this way with many of their cars, with sort of getting to the soul of the driver in a way.
Yeah.
There's that Italian swear word again, So.
deeper way of touching on the entirety of the person, with beauty and that transcendental. And I know you mentioned Top Gear. I know Jeremy Clarkson said that there's a magic within Alphas when he's like, and only Alpha drivers can truly understand it. And then, but he also said that, the old saying in that same episode that, if you're quiet, you can hear your Alpha rusting in the garage, because of, that back. But I also think when it comes to Alphas versus some of the other cars, in your wheelhouse, pun intended, Alphas have that history, right? I mean, Enzo Ferrari getting his start there. They've gone through 2 world wars. They've advanced beyond what anybody would have recognized or assumed, and just beat the odds through so much. And so I would imagine myself, having never driven one, unfortunately, I'll have to correct that. Although I was driving around the last couple of days and I don't see one. But I imagine that there's that feeling when you get in versus like me jumping into a Toyota or something like that, where I'm like a reliable, never ending, the dishwasher car, right? You can put it in the dishwasher and you can pull it out and it's still going to be fine. So,
I mean, there's just, we have a minivan, obviously, for all the kids. And I mean, there's definitely something different about jumping in the minivan and getting behind the wheel of that versus, a car like this or something similar. So, I mean, what he says is true. And I think he also says often you're not a true petrol head unless you've owned an Alfa Romeo at least one time. And the part of that kind of, it's interesting that he says that, because you notice with automotive enthusiasts that they don't always want things to work perfectly. There's kind of, especially, and I think men are that way in general. We like to fix things. We like to work on things. If things were perfect all of the time, like we kind of think in an idealistic way that if my car never broke, then everything would be great and life would just be perfect and I would be 100% completely happy and satisfied. But the truth is that's not true. Yeah. And so I think that at least the older reputation of Alpha kind of fits that, where there's an enjoyable aspect of the car. And if you can just get past the moments where you're pulling your hair out with it, those good moments make all of those other moments all worth it.
Amen.
Kind of reminds me of back in the day when people used to ride horses, like they'd form a relationship with their horse because their horse had a personality. It's like your car gives you a little resistance. It's got a personality. It's not just going to do everything you want it to do. It's going to push back a little bit. That makes it. Yeah. So tell us about your car though, because a lot of people aren't super familiar with Alphas and the kind of cars that they make.
Yeah.
And, some people might even be like completely unaware that they're selling cars in the United States. But I've ridden in your car. It's pretty awesome. So tell us about it.
So, that's something that, especially with Alpha coming back to the US, that and Fiat as well. I mean, you know the old saying, "Fix it again, Tony." I get teased about that all the time. "Fix it again, Toby" is what people say.
But
It's a great Catholic name for a car, though.
It is. It's fantastic. We've had to kind of, help ease people into going against that reputation, because Alfa and Fiat definitely well-deserved reputation for cars that don't always behave, I guess I would say. When back in the day when they left the United States, a lot of their newer cars now they really are actually reliable and well-made cars. They don't have any more problems than any other car brand or car make nowadays. This particular car they have a line of what I would call luxury sports sedans. It's the Giulia, which actually is the name of an older car they used to make. They have basically an SUV version of this car that has the same engine. It's called the Stelvio. Yeah. And so they have two variants of it. There's a 2-liter inline 4 turbocharged version. And we work on a lot of those. That's how we actually came to working on the Jeep Wrangler. Is FCA, Fiat Chrysler, decided to start putting that engine in the Jeep Wrangler, as well as other cars. So, but this particular version of the Giulia, and there's a version of the Stelvio as well, is called the Quadrifoglio. I call it the QV. Technically, that's not what they call it anymore, but what QV actually stands for is Quadrifoglio Verde. They used to, so there's a green 4-leaf clover badge that is on all of the QV cars. And this is something they used to do with their older, kind of like a boosted up performance models. And the heritage of that badge just comes back from a racer that put this badge on the car, and they won with it on the car. So they decided to paint it on the car every time they raced, and it's just kind of been a thing ever since. So this particular model is a 2.9 liter V6 twin turbo. It's over 500 horsepower from the factory. We can make them 600 horsepower and upwards. It's too fast for the road in all reality.
Yeah.
But it's a very fast car. And this engine is actually a Ferrari engine, or it's Ferrari derived, but it's the same V8. Ferrari. It's the same V8 they use. But they just cut 2 cylinders off the back essentially, and then in Italian fashion said, "Well, what else does it need? Oh, we'll just slap 2 turbos on it."
Yeah, why not? I mean, that's actually faster than the SS that we were riding in, Sam. That was like 540 horsepowers or so. So you said, sorry, what were the horsepowers for myself and our listeners again? In manufactured.
Stock. This one has 505, and we can do stuff to it that takes it upwards of 600.
So how much does yours have? What have you done? What have you done to it?
At the moment, it actually just has the stock tune on it. The reason why it's actually up here is because I was doing stuff on it and I had to leave it here. And I thought, well, this actually will make for a nice backdrop for this kind of thing.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
Well, like I said, I've ridden in it, and with the stock tune, it's incredibly fast. So I can't imagine putting extra horsepower on it, what it would be like. But tires get expensive really quickly. I'll just say that.
I bet. And so with Eurocompulsion, did you guys find yourself making replacement parts, or just always advanced parts, like better intakes, better exhaust, like these sort of things, and all in between? I understand. There's the beginning and the end. But what did you guys get your start doing, and then how has it expanded, and what are you currently doing right now?
So we started just trying to do what we could to upgrade certain parts. With a lot of the older cars, it became an instance of replacing parts that have gone bad, basically. Except we thought how can we make these parts better than they were original? That's sort of how my father-in-law. So whenever I married my wife, he had a very small business manufacturing hoses out of silicone. And what he would do would just replicate the factory lines for a lot of the older cars, older Alfas and Fiats and older Maseratis. We've worked on a lot of different, mostly all Italian. He would just replace all the lines that were factory lines, but with the silicone, and these silicone hoses would, they would outlast the car.
Wow.
So when the newer cars came, I think our original intent was to do that, but then we bought a car and realized, that's okay, but we can make that a little bit better. Yeah. And it's important to realize too, so car manufacturers, they have a lot of resources at their disposal. And if they wanted to, they could make whatever they want to. But oftentimes they are limited by, in Europe, there are what was last Euro T6, there are emission standards, basically. We have the EPA here in the United States. So when they put a configuration of a car together, both electronically in software and in hardware, it has to pass certain standards. And when it does, only that configuration is actually certified. They have to pay to do that. And then that's what has to be sold. They have to go through a lot of trouble to legally change that on a production car. So, they have budgets to meet. They have to do things mass producible, mass assembly, things like that. So they don't make shortcuts and make things bad on purpose, but there are definitely ways that things can be improved when you're not under those limitations. So yeah, we started just looking at those parts and said, hey, I think we can improve that. We can make that out of a better material, one that's not as thermal conductive, like plastic or aluminum. We chose silicone. We do a lot of things out of carbon fiber and silicone. So it started that way. And then we actually went into this market very slowly and started seeing other people do different things with the engine tuning and electronics. And we actually tried a lot of other people's stuff just on our own cars because we just wanted to modify them.
Yeah.
And we looked at these things and said, you know what, we can do this better. And that's pretty much how this has transpired, is we look at everything and we say, you know what, we can do this better. Yeah. So we just make something better, and it's kind of spun into what it is. I think the majority of what we do now is all aftermarket performance parts. And we do sell other things third party that we don't make. Like, we do not manufacture suspension upgrades, brakes, various things like that, but everything in regards to exhaust systems, engine work, turbocharging, air intakes. And then I do a lot of the software, it's all engine management software, calibration, and that kind of stuff. All that stuff we do ourselves and in-house. So that's the majority of what we sell.
I love it. No, I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. So let's say somebody out there, they've got a cool car in their garage, a Mustang or a Camaro or an Italian car like an Alfa. Yeah. But they're like, man, the stock thing, it's good, but I want to make it better. Like, what would you say, I don't know, top 3 to 5 upgrades that somebody could do to take their car, their kind of cool car, to the next level?
Something, that is manageable for most people and it will be relatively just bolt on directly. The easiest things to do are usually a tune, and intake, and exhaust. I mean, that is everything that we kind of put together in regards to the power packages, for the end user, for customers who are going to buy this stuff and either have a local shop installer or they're going to work on it themselves, which a lot of them do. Those are usually the easiest things to do. A tune will typically net you a pretty decent power gain. Air intakes, it depends on the car and how the factory design is. Sometimes the factory does a pretty good job of designing a nice ram air system. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're really bad, actually. I've seen some pretty rough ones. Yeah. So, people will often say, well, cold air intakes aren't going to net you anything. And sometimes they don't, but a lot of times they will. a lot of people, so nowadays it used to be that you would have to get a tune in order to have an exhaust and an air intake on your car, because you would literally, like I mentioned before, a car is an open loop. So if you change something on it, it doesn't know to adapt to it. So you have to tell it what to do in order to, increase the performance of a part of some sort. Newer cars don't really do that. They are wideband, is what they call. So when you put an air intake on your car, it can actually detect the increase in airflow or a cooler temperature of the airflow, and the car will actually make its own adjustment, and you'll actually get increased power without having to do anything else most of the time. Now, that's not to say you could tune the engine and get more out of it with an intake on the car, but you will see gains from those things. So I always like to do exhausts in fact, I think Sam, that's the first thing he did on a car he just got.
Yeah.
And that's usually because when you put an exhaust on the car, not only do you get a little bit of a power boost, but you also get the,
Sound,
the stimuli, of the increased sound, and it makes you feel like you're going faster, even if you're not actually going faster.
Or it makes you want to go faster just so you can listen to that sound.
Yes. You will find that your gas mileage, your fuel economy has gone down significantly after an exhaust.
A two-edged sword. That's too funny. Well, I appreciate that. So tune, intake, and exhaust, right? Those are the three things. And I think that's really good. I appreciate sharing that, because I think one of the things here at Catholic Gentlemen is we're always looking to expand the minds of gentlemen, right? And Sam and I both have degrees of understanding of cars, him a little bit more than me. But I think that's great. I want to shift a little bit, because you've said it twice now, I believe.
Is that a pun?
Not they're just flowing. I don't know. And so you've said twice now that when you're not wanting to pull your hair out, and that's been my experience. So I changed the lower control arms on my Toyota Sienna just a few months ago. And I got, one lower control arm adjusted and changed, and I was pretty excited about having done that. It took me about 2.5 hours. And I thought to myself, okay, great. I'm going to go to the other side, and it's going to be like 2 hours, because now I know what to do. And I go to the other side, and it's completely different, right? It's attached to the transmission, and it's not symmetrical. And I don't know, a learned experience for me, but it was that moment where I was just like, I'm never going to get this done. Like, I don't have the right parts, the right tools. I'm going to have to go buy some. And then, you start reaching that, pull your hair out. And my neighbor who runs oil, a Mobil 1, oil station, he talked to me. He came over and was helping me out. And he just said, patience is key when always working on cars. And he said, don't give yourself an end time. So I'd like to hear from you. What sort of vices, is that common just to cars in general, or particular to Alphas? Like what's your thoughts on that natural vice that wants to come out, or the virtues that could be developed while working on cars?
I think it's not necessarily. I think everybody, especially when you deal with a car brand that is historically known for being unreliable or just difficult. All automotive enthusiasts kind of think that their car is like their car brand is the one that's always a pain in the butt. And it's because I think that's just how cars are usually. There's definitely patience required. In fact, you will get to a point where you're ready to take it to the nearest cliff, put a brick on the gas pedal, and just walk away.
I felt that, yes.
I mean, and that's kind of, especially when you have children, boys, it's very good to engage in those struggles together, I think, that you learn as a man, but also that you can pass on to them, because there are so many times where you require so much perseverance, but just to get to the end and realize that maybe what you were trying to struggle after wasn't actually the real problem. It was something incredibly simple. But you went through this entire process of, checking things and trying to figure out, is this the problem or is this the problem? You're thinking on a high level, very complex issues, only to come to find out that it was just a spark plug that didn't even look bad and you just needed to swap it out. But throughout this whole process, you learned, how to say, okay, I'm not going to quit on this, but I'm also not going to get angry about it. I'm going to try and exercise my patience. There's a reason why people lose their 10 millimeter sockets. And I will say that only about 50% of the time it's because you misplace it. The other 50% of the time is because you're throwing it across the shop, because you're frustrated.
Yeah.
But, there's definitely a lot of patience involved. We have a ton of tools that I've probably only used one time.
Yep.
And it's because we encountered something that is something I've never seen before. It doesn't make any sense. And we literally have to buy a special tool. And that's one of the, you're working on something, you need to get it done. You want to get it done quickly because you want to finish this project or you want to get it moving.
Yeah.
And then you run into this roadblock. And the only tool that you can get is from some obscure shop online in the UK, that only ships, on the first Thursday of the month kind of thing. And you wait 3 weeks to get this tool only to use it one time. And then it sits in a drawer. And so your project is delayed this way. I mean, there's lots of things to learn from working on cars, just that equate to life, I guess you would say. And it can equate to virtue.
Amen. So working on cars makes you a better husband and a better father. So I think that's my takeaway.
That's a way that you can look at it.
Are you saying your wife has lots of unexpected problems, John? No, I'm just kidding.
I'm just saying I need to spend more time working on cars.
Rick calls to mind talking about patience, that time when Toby and I were trying to change a radiator and there was a drain plug that would not come out. And I think, how long did we wrestle that? Like an hour and a half just trying to get that drain plug out?
I think it was probably about an hour, I think. Yeah. And we broke a couple things along the way too, which just made it more difficult.
Yeah. It was pretty miserable.
That lower control arm, the ball joint on the driver's side wouldn't come off. And I bought 2 different tools to remove it. And then eventually just had the fork and I whacked it at least 900 plus times before it came off. And
was that therapeutic or
at the beginning? And then it was, and then I reminded myself how out of shape I am, and so more virtues to work on.
I have to, I think my wife is probably increased in virtue and probably received a lot of graces for her patience with me in regards to the endeavors and projects with cars. She probably deserves more credit than I can even give her. I guess in a way you can say, oh, we're helping foster your virtue. I can't tell you how many times, she's said, what time are you going to be home today? Oh, I'll be home at 6:30, honey. And then I come in 30 minutes late or an hour late. And it's because I was doing something on the car that I definitely did not plan appropriately for time-wise. And something happens and now I'm stuck putting it back together and she's waiting on me. So
So that's a really interesting segue though, just because, I mean, we all of us on this call are husbands and fathers, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this podcast are also husbands and fathers, or at least aspire to be. Mm-hmm. You've been learning about St. Joseph. I've been learning about St. Joseph, and I think both of us have father wounds, if you will. A lot of people in our culture do. Mm-hmm. Fatherhood is something that is so important. And yet, a lot of us, aspire to be fathers, but feel ill-equipped to be the fathers that we want to be. And so, as we've been learning about St. Joseph, I think it's been very healing. And I'm just wondering if there's any lessons you could share that you've learned about St. Joseph or from St. Joseph, that as you've Because St. Joseph was a craftsman in his own way. You know, he didn't work on cars, but he worked on wood. And I'm sure he had to employ a lot of the same virtues that we're talking about. So what have you learned that you think might be helpful to the men listening to this podcast?
I think that especially modeling, St. Joseph, he's I'll call him the OG gentleman, the original gentleman.
That's right.
I think detachment from not just in a general sense, I think it's what people would say is detachment from worldly things, but really it's a detachment from the preoccupation of letting your ambition and career, I think, kind of supersede really what your true vocation is, which is, if you're a father, you're a husband. And ultimately that is our, as Catholic men, as Catholic gentlemen, that's our primary duty above all else. The sanctification of our children and of our wives, and of ourselves through the process. And, that was something I struggled with at first when starting our business. Was I felt like I had to, I'm naturally a very ambitious person, but credit to my wife for being, sort of like a even keel balance to that with her, calmness. She's always encouraging me to kind of take a step back from things. I think when you start a business or a career, you feel like you have to just totally throw yourself into it 100%. And it's important to recognize, as St. Joseph as a model, he put in his best effort when he was working, but he also knew how to detach himself from his daily work, his projects. I'm sure he had, just like how I have customer cars or, various people to deal with, projects and things that they expect to be done. I'm sure he had things he was building for people and fashioning for people that needed to be done, or they wanted it to be a certain way, but he never let that interfere with the family life. And so oftentimes I think we feel, and I know I felt afraid, like if I don't put all my focus into this, it's going to fail. And I'm going to let down my family. I'm going to let down the people who rely upon me, because I'm not as successful, or I wasn't able to be as successful XYZ here or there. And it's very strange how when that detachment comes into play, that's sort of what you're detaching from. You're letting go of that need to feel like you have to make this work on your own. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Because I think we tell ourselves that that's how it is, but in reality, that's not how it is. It's not true. We have to rely on God for that peace, and to know that, he didn't lead you to this spot to die. He's going to take care of you. But that's something I was afraid to do, was to detach from that and let go of that feeling. But once I kind of started to do that, I realized like things just kind of continued working out around me. Even though I felt like in my mind, the focus wasn't on it. If I wasn't focusing 100% on this thing, that it was not going to get done or it wasn't going to work out. But that wasn't happening. Things were working out anyway. That's because it's in God's control and it's not in my control. St. Joseph, I think, knew that. He was very good. And we see that in many instances with, God asking him to do things that he wasn't necessarily comfortable with at first or confident in at first, but he totally detached from his own understanding and said, okay, God says to do this, I'm going to do it. And, come what may, will be God's will.
Amen.
And I think for most men who are trying to be Catholic gentlemen, because to me, that's the most valuable lesson I think I've learned, especially from this St. Joseph consecration and things that, Sam is talking about, is just how to let go of that and detach from that when you are a young professional or you have a career, because it's easy to get distracted by that, and it can really cause you to suffer, not only internally, but your your entire family life and what you're charged with taking care of, will suffer.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown, that burden weighs us down and gets us off track, right? It keeps us from our ultimate pursuit, and which is holiness, and that for our family too. And just so many things are clicking when you're saying that, and I'm so grateful for you bringing it up, because it is that uniformity with God's will, but it's that confident abandonment in the moment. And this has been a huge struggle, and I think of a lot of men, and certainly myself, is, well, if I abandon myself too much, then all this stuff's going to crumble, and I'm not going to know how to pick it up and take care of my family and improve. And people are going to look less of me. We also find that when we're talking about humility and stuff like that, is if I work on the virtue of humility, will I no longer be a leader and no longer be successful, right? And we kind of, we have that misguided notion of these things. Instead of putting our trust and our confident abandonment in God and his goodness and his love and the fact that he wants to spend eternity with us. And this is not just a once a week battle. This is a daily battle, at least for me. And so, yeah.
I mean, I can certainly relate too, and if you think about what is kind of the opposite of trust, it's trying to control everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something scary about trust for men. We don't like to let go. It's hard for us to let go. And I think, I was talking earlier about fathers, and what do you receive from your father 9 times out of 10? It's an identity. It's a security, if you will. And if you look at people who had loving fathers, a lot of times they're very confident, they're very secure, they're rooted in who they are.
Yeah.
But for men who feel insecure in that way, we try to erect an external identity a lot of times that we place our security in. And really, I think the challenge for us as Catholic men, Catholic gentlemen that aspire to grow in holiness, it's to move that identity from the externals to the internals, to something that can't be taken away. That we are children of God, and that we are being taken care of by God, and that ultimately our success or our failure in life depends on our relationship with him. And that's not something that can be taken away like an externals can. Like if you're placing your, your security in your career and then you get fired, that's going to be devastating to you. You're going to lose the whole sense of who you are. But when you learn to trust in an identity that can't be taken away, it's freeing. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, that is absolutely something we can all relate to, is learning to let go.
I think that's the reality, like you said, is, businesses can fail, things can change, your job can change, the electric cars, no more gas engines. I mean, we find a way to adapt, but when when you're trying to find your worth, I guess, in a sense, from those external things, then it makes it very difficult when things get hard, or when you fall on hard times, or when those things change suddenly, because it sort of uproots what you thought was your foundation for confidence and everything else. So it's very important, I think, what you said, that you find that internally. I think that's one of the other qualities, that's talked about with St. Joseph, is that in that specifically this consecration that Sam mentioned that we've been reading, is how he sort of minimizes himself to not have to be the center of attention and front and center, constantly being known for your accomplishments or your career accomplishments, talents and skills. As fathers, that's it can supersede your children very easily when you are constantly focused on that, especially if it's through work or your job or your career.
I didn't mean to promote this on this episode, but now that we're talking about it, if anyone's wondering what consecration we're talking about, it's this one right here. It's called probably backwards on the screen, but it's called Custos, Total Consecration through Saint Joseph. by Devin Schadt.
Shad.
Yeah. So look it up if you wanna grow in your relationship with Saint Joseph and learn many beautiful lessons about fatherhood.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And that's a powerful one for fathers. I'm excited that you guys are going through it. It's a great one. So, what's some of the I don't want to end just yet. I want to hear from you, Toby. What's some of the suffering that you've had to endure? That's just what's been going through my mind. In the last, because all gentlemen have to balance suffering, and you're showing us that Catholic gentlemen are everywhere, right? They're just not an elite few that work at a Catholic university or a Catholic apostolate or something like that. You are working with your hands and obviously on a computer doing software and things like that, and running a company. What's some of the biggest setbacks that you've had to grow in throughout this process?
I think that the biggest thing is kind of what you mentioned in the question. It's being in an environment where your demographics are vastly different than maybe you are personally, and how you deal with people in the real world that aren't Catholic. We get kind of used to, Sam and I have talked about this. You're kind of in your bubble, where a lot of your friends are from your parish or from other parishes, and you see your friends at Mass, and a lot of the people that are around you, especially when you focus on family life, you kind of have Catholicism constantly around you. But when you go out into the world, your demographic changes. And in the car community, automotive enthusiasts, they come from all walks of life. Sadly, majority of what I have to encounter, I don't get to encounter that many fellow Catholics. They are definitely out there.
Yeah.
But it's vastly different. So I think coping with that in a few instances has been difficult for me, and I think it's probably pride.
Yeah.
But I think the term for it is uncharitable criticism.
Yeah.
You guys have talked about on your on your podcast before about how people use the internet, the anonymity of the internet. It's a great place for automotive enthusiasts to join together and be able to talk about things, but it's also a really terrible place for people to just give each other uncharitable criticism. But as a company, we've also been the subject, and a lot of companies are, the subject of uncharitable criticism. People will use, I guess they say things on the internet they would never say to you in person. I'll just say that. And most of the time, it's not even true stuff. People let their emotions come out in how they handle or deal with businesses. We've had competitors that have done things that I'm not even sure how to respond to sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a personal struggle, because whenever somebody does something like that, you feel a necessary need to try to correct or give justice in some way. And it's hard to hold back sometimes because you want to try and defend yourself, but also sometimes the situation is as such, it looks very unbecoming. It doesn't reflect very positively, even if you do try to defend yourself. And that's something that's been difficult over the years, is trying to sort of have that detachment, step back and say, I'm going to let these people say whatever they want to say. And even if what they're saying is not true, I'm just going to take the high road and move on, and, focus on what we're doing and do what we do best. And oftentimes, my father-in-law always says something, and it really is true. People vote with their wallets. And so, you can have somebody and these are Italian cars. So they're like all obscure Italian car forum, like, that kind of thing. But you'll have one unhappy person, and I've literally received messages from people that aren't even our customers,
Wow.
And they literally say, I don't like you. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that no one ever buys anything from you. That's a verbatim statement, just about.
Wow.
And so it's kind of like, well, how do you respond to that? What do you do?
Yeah.
But the truth is in almost all instances, it never seems to negatively affect us in a way where it's substantial. People really, truly do vote with their wallets. I think they see the way you conduct yourself, the way you carry yourself, and it's much more valuable, I've learned over time, to keep your chin up and proceed with, say the way St. Joseph would treat some of these people on the internet, versus wasting your time even trying to defend yourself. But that's been a struggle, because I used to let those kinds of things
eat you up.
Yeah, they would get, even if I wasn't externally doing anything about them, internally it would kind of eat at you. It's something you think about, like, maybe I'm not really good at what I do, and I guess, like I said, I have to give my wife a lot of credit, because she's always the one who says, why you don't need to pay attention to these people. Just, keep your chin up. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing is right. And you know what you're capable of and what you're not capable of.
Yeah.
Be aware of your vices and your downfalls, and focus on what you are good at. Keep moving forward. So.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Well, I think it's great. So I want to make sure that our listeners can look into you. And so why don't you let us know what the correct URL is, and I will put it in the show notes. So anybody who's checking us out at catholicgentleman.com or on YouTube can find it in the show notes. So
our website is it's www.shopeurocompulsion.net.
Excellent.
So, and I think if you type in eurocompulsion.net, it's all the forwards going to the same spot. So
excellent. Well, wonderful. Well, Toby, I'm just so grateful for your witness, grateful for you as a Catholic gentleman and joining us on this call. And you're in our prayers, and we'll just look forward to the next time we get to connect.
I am absolutely honored and humbled to even be talking to you guys. So thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. And until next time, don't break any speed limits.
I do a lot of my driving in Mexico, Sam. You should know that. You've been with me before.
So. Wonderful. Well, as we end every episode with that reminder that we all need.
Be a man, be a saint.